The crystal chandelier cast warm light over the Fairmont Olympic Ballroom as my brother Jake raised his champagne glass for what promised to be another self-congratulatory wedding speech. I sat at table 8, relegated there despite being immediate family, while he commanded attention from the head table. "Thank you all for being here to celebrate Sarah and me," Jake began, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who'd never been told no. "It means the world to have our families and closest friends witness this moment." Sarah beamed beside him in her designer gown, looking every inch the corporate lawyer's perfect wife. They'd met at his consulting firm, both rising stars in Seattle's business elite. "Looking out at all of you tonight," Jake continued, scanning the crowd of tech executives, lawyers, and finance professionals, "I'm reminded of how blessed we are to be surrounded by such accomplished people. Real achievers, real professionals." I sipped my wine and checked my phone discreetly. My CTO had just posted our Q3 numbers. Revenue up 340% year-over-year, user acquisition exceeding all projections. Our board meeting tomorrow would discuss acquiring 3 smaller firms, including one that looked familiar from tonight's guest list. Of course, Jake's voice took on that particular tone I'd heard since childhood. Not everyone in our family chose the traditional path to success. Several guests chuckled, knowing looks exchanged. I could feel eyes turning toward me, the black sheep in the sea of business suits. "My little sister Riley has always been creative," Jake said with a patronizing smile. "While I was building my career in corporate consulting, she was playing around with computers, making little apps and websites." More laughter rippled through the crowd. Uncle David shook his head with amused sympathy. "But hey," Jake raised his glass higher, "at least I have a real career that can support a family and contribute meaningfully to society. Sarah and I are proof that hard work and professional dedication pay off." The applause was generous. Appreciative murmurs about Jake's meteoric rise at Morrison & Associates, his recent promotion to senior partner. I smiled politely and applauded, though my phone was buzzing with notifications from our investor relations team. Goldman Sachs wanted to schedule another meeting about our IPO timeline. Microsoft's acquisition team had sent revised partnership terms. "Riley's doing her best with her little computer hobby," Jake continued. "Maybe someday she'll find something stable, something that actually makes money." Dad nodded approvingly, clearly proud of his successful son and sympathetic toward his struggling daughter. "But enough about family charity cases," Jake laughed. "Tonight is about celebrating real success, real achievements, and real love." As Jake launched into romantic stories, I pulled up our company's latest valuation report. Synertech Solutions, my little app company, was currently valued at $2.3 billion following our Series D funding round. Our productivity platform served 847 Fortune 500 companies and employed 1,200 people across 14 countries. The guest beside me, an older gentleman I didn't recognize, leaned over. "Excuse me, did you say something about an app?" "Oh, nothing important. Just work stuff." He studied me carefully. "You look familiar. Do you work in tech?" "I run a small software company," I said automatically. "Interesting. What kind of software?" Before I could answer, Jake's speech reached its crescendo with another toast to real careers and real success, followed by thunderous applause. As guests settled back for dinner, the man extended his hand. "I'm sorry, I don't think we were properly introduced. Robert Chin, CEO of Morrison & Associates." My stomach dropped. Morrison & Associates, Jake's consulting firm. The same company that appeared on our acquisition target list for tomorrow's board meeting. "Riley Martinez," I managed. "Martinez? As in Jake's sister? The one who works with computers?" "That's me." Robert's eyes narrowed. "What did you say your company was called?" I hesitated. "Synertech Solutions." Robert went very still. "Synertech Solutions. The Synertech Solutions. You seem to know the company." "Know it." Robert set down his wine glass with trembling fingers. "We've been trying to land Synertech as a client for 2 years. Your platform revolutionized productivity management. Your CEO Riley Martinez." I nodded. "But Jake said you make little apps. He made it sound like you were barely getting by." "Jake has never asked what my company actually does." Robert stared at me. "Riley, your company is worth more than my entire firm. Your Q2 revenue numbers were $847 million, I finished quietly. And Jake thinks you make little apps. Mr. Chin, what exactly has Jake told you about my work? He said you play around with computers and build small websites for local businesses. He mentioned you were struggling to find stable employment. I felt heat rise in my cheeks. He said I was struggling. Last month he asked if Morrison and Associates ever needed basic IT support. Said his sister was good with computers and might be available for small projects. The humiliation was complete. Jake had been trying to get me pity work from his company, the same company on our acquisition target list. Robert pulled out his phone, scrolling through news articles. Riley, your Series D funding round last month. The valuation was $2.3 billion. I showed him our quarterly report. We're actually evaluating potential acquisitions. Companies that could benefit from integration with our platform. Robert's face went pale. Is Morrison and Associates on this list? I turned the phone so he could see our acquisition targets. Third one down. Robert stared at the screen showing his company's name and our preliminary offer. $180 million. You're buying my company, he said weakly. We're considering it. And Jake has no idea. Jake has no idea about anything involving my actual career. Robert excused himself to make a phone call, leaving me to process the situation. Jake continued his speech, now sharing embarrassing childhood stories about my awkward teenage years. Riley was always the weird one, he said with fond condescension. While other kids were playing sports, she was locked in her room with computers, talking about changing the world with technology. The crowd laughed at the naive ambitions of youth. We kept telling her to be realistic, to focus on practical skills. But you know how kids are with their impossible dreams. I pulled up our employee directory, 1,200 names of people whose livelihoods depended on my little computer projects. The funny thing is, Jake continued, Riley always thought she was going to be some big tech entrepreneur. She was convinced she'd build the next Google or something. Mom smiled indulgently, the expression reserved for humoring children's fantasies. Well, we can't all be tech billionaires, right? Some of us have to do real work in the real world. My phone buzzed. Wall Street Journal wants to move up the IPO interview. Can you do tomorrow at 9 a.m.? Stock projections look better than expected. Robert returned looking like he'd seen a ghost. I just spoke with our board chair. She wants an emergency meeting tomorrow morning. Everything okay? Riley, I have to ask, is this acquisition friendly or hostile? We prefer friendly acquisitions. And if Jake were to complicate things? I gestured toward Jake, who was describing his plans to expand Morrison and Associates through strategic partnerships. He's been positioning himself as our rising star, Robert explained. The board's been considering him for executive track, partly based on his tech sector expertise. Tech sector expertise? Based on his family connections. He's mentioned several times that his sister works in technology and could provide insights into digital transformation. The irony was suffocating. Jake had been leveraging my supposed tech expertise while simultaneously mocking it. What specifically has he told your board about my background? He said you work as a freelance web developer. That you'd started a small business but it was struggling to scale. And based on that, your board thinks Jake has tech insights? He's been very confident about digital transformation strategies. At the head table, Jake was explaining how Morrison and Associates could leverage emerging technologies, his tone authoritative thanks to his family connections. Mr. Chin, what would happen to Jake's position if the board learned his tech insider is actually the CEO of the company acquiring you? The optics would be complicated. Especially if they realized he's been completely wrong about his insider's expertise? Robert nodded. Monday's board meeting. Jake is scheduled to present his strategic vision for tech sector expansion. Based on his insider knowledge. Would you mind if I attended that meeting? As who? As the CEO of Synertech Solutions discussing acquisition terms. Robert's smile was slow but genuine. I think that could be arranged. Monday morning I stood outside Morrison and Associates downtown offices with Jennifer Walsh, my head of M&A. The building was smaller than expected, with understated elegance that screamed tradition over innovation. The conference room occupied most of the top floor, 8 board members seated around a polished table as Robert made introductions. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce Riley Martinez, CEO of Synertech Solutions, and Jennifer Walsh, Head of Mergers and Acquisitions. Respectful attention from people about to potentially receive very large checks. Before we begin, announced Dorothy Harrison, the board chair, Jake Martinez will present his strategic vision for our tech sector expansion. Jake entered with confident preparation, tablet in hand, ready to impress with his industry insights. He stopped dead when he saw me. Riley, what are you doing here? I'm here to discuss the potential acquisition of Morrison & Associates by Synertech Solutions. Acquisition? Jake looked confused. But I'm supposed to present our growth strategy. Dorothy consulted her notes. Jake, you're scheduled to share your vision for leveraging tech industry connections. You mentioned insider access through family connections. Jake's face went white. Perfect timing, Dorothy continued. Since your sister is apparently a tech executive, she can provide context. Actually, Robert interjected, there might be confusion about Riley's role in the tech industry. Jake described his sister as a freelance web developer who could provide basic industry insights, Dorothy said. Jennifer slid documents across the table. Synertech Solutions quarterly report, including revenue, client base and market position. I watched their faces change as they scanned the numbers. $847 million in quarterly revenue. Market capitalization of $2.3 billion. This shows Synertech as one of the largest enterprise software companies in North America, said board member Patricia Wong. That's correct. And you're the founder and CEO? Also correct. All eyes turned to Jake, frozen like a deer in headlights. Jake, Dorothy said slowly, you told us your sister was a struggling freelance web developer. She. Jake's mouth opened soundlessly. You said she was barely making ends meet with small projects. I thought. Jake's voice was barely a whisper. You thought what? I asked. I thought you were just playing around with computers. Making little websites. Mom said you were having trouble finding stable work. When did Mom say that? 3 years ago when you quit Microsoft. I quit Microsoft to start Synertech. But you never said you started a company. You said freelance work. I said I was starting my own business. You assumed freelance work. Dorothy flipped through our quarterly report with amazement. Ms. Martinez, these numbers are extraordinary. Jennifer slid acquisition documents across the table. Acquisition terms including retention packages and integration timeline. Jake found his voice. You're buying the company I work for? I'm buying the company where you work, yes. But I was supposed to present my strategic vision today. Please go ahead. I'd love to hear your tech industry insights. Jake looked around at 8 expectant faces, his presentation suddenly meaningless with an actual tech billionaire sitting nearby. I don't think I have anything meaningful to add. Dorothy turned to our documents. Ms. Martinez, this offer is generous. Why Morrison & Associates specifically? Excellent client relationships in manufacturing, which aligns with our expansion strategy. Your corporate culture appears to value innovation. Appears to. I glanced at Jake. That assessment was based on external research. This morning's revelations about internal assumptions have been illuminating. In what way? Some of your rising talent may have been overstating their industry expertise. Jake, Dorothy said carefully, you've been positioning yourself as having insider tech access. I thought I did, Jake said miserably. Based on what? Based on Riley working with computers. Did you ever ask her for those insights? No. Did you ever ask about the specifics of her work? No. So your claimed expertise was based on assumptions you never verified? Jake nodded silently. Patricia looked up from the acquisition terms. Does this change your interest in acquiring Morrison & Associates? That depends on whether Morrison & Associates is committed to accuracy in client communications and strategic planning. The Synertech acquisition of Morrison & Associates was finalized 6 weeks later for $195 million. Jake kept his job, but his trajectory toward executive leadership quietly disappeared. He now reports to Jennifer Walsh, who heads our new consulting division. At Thanksgiving dinner 2 months later, the family dynamic had shifted. Mom spent the meal asking about Synertech's corporate culture. Dad wanted to understand our acquisition strategy. Jake was quieter, more thoughtful. How are you adjusting to the acquisition? I asked him as we cleared dishes. It's been humbling, he said honestly. Working for you. Seeing how you actually run things. Different from what you expected? Different from what I assumed. He paused. Riley, I owe you an apology. For what specifically? For talking about your work like it was a hobby. For making assumptions instead of asking questions. For trying to use family connections without understanding what those connections actually were. And for being embarrassed by you when I should have been proud. Why were you embarrassed? Because your success didn't look like what I thought success should look like. You didn't have the corporate job, the fancy office, the traditional markers. So I assumed you were failing. When actually I was building something bigger than any corporate job. When actually you were building something bigger than I could imagine. We worked in silence, the comfortable rhythm of siblings who'd done dishes together countless times. Jake, what are you going to do now? Learn. Work hard. Try to actually earn the position I thought I deserved. And stop making assumptions about people's lives? Definitely stop making assumptions. My phone buzzed with a notification. The IPO filing was moving forward ahead of schedule, with initial market response exceeding projections. I showed Jake the message. How much will Synertech be worth after the IPO? Conservative estimates put us around $8 billion. Jake whistled low. $8 billion. And I was trying to get you freelance web development projects. The irony wasn't lost on me. I really am an idiot. You're not an idiot. You just learned the difference between assumptions and reality. Expensive lesson. The best ones usually are.